They say history is written by the victors, but what if some events were never meant to be written at all? What if they were erased not out of pride or shame, but out of fear? The RMS Titanic set sail on April 10, 1912, from Southampton, a gleaming beacon of progress and ambition. But beneath the glamour of her maiden voyage, beneath the champagne toasts and the music, something ancient and wrong was buried deep in her bowels. Most who saw it dismissed it. A lone, unmarked crate, approximately 6 feet long and no wider than a coffin, wheeled in under the cloak of night. A soft rain fell over the docks that evening, muffling the creak of the dolly wheels as 2 men in dark uniforms wheeled the box up the gangway. No one ever found their names on the crew list, nor did they appear in any port logs. They were tall, silent, and refused to speak to anyone. A third man accompanied them, shorter, older, wearing a priest's cassock faded with time and salt. He carried a leather-bound book strapped shut with iron clasps and whispered constantly under his breath in Latin. When a dock worker approached to ask about the crate's destination, the priest raised a shaking hand and muttered, "Don't speak of it. Don't even see it." The worker laughed nervously and turned away. He wouldn't make it to the next day, struck down in a freak accident involving a falling cargo net. Some said his eyes were still open when they found him, pupils frozen and rimmed with frost. Below deck, deeper than any passenger would ever travel, past the heat of the boiler rooms and the clang of iron tools, lay a corridor unlit and unused. The crew joked it was cursed, a design flaw from the shipbuilders that led to nowhere, a dead end with a rusted door at its end, marked only with a painted Roman numeral. Compartment 13, a section of the ship not included on any of the official blueprints. It was there the crate was wheeled. It was there the priest stood for nearly 30 minutes, whispering against the door, before they slid the box inside and locked it tight. No key, no manifest, no discussion. The ship left Southampton with the sun glinting off her hull like polished ivory, hailed by crowds and press. To the world, she was the unsinkable dream. To a select few below deck, she was carrying something far more dangerous than arrogance or hubris. Something that had slept for centuries, bound in secrecy and fear, now floating toward the new world. Among the lower crew, there were whispers almost immediately. Duncan Mills, a stoker with arms like steel beams and lungs full of coal dust, claimed he heard it the first night. 3 slow knocks from behind the door. Not echoes, not metal shifting. Knocks, rhythmic and deliberate. He told the others and they laughed, but none volunteered to check it out. When he returned to the corridor the next night, the air was cold. Not the normal chill of steel and sea, but cold that made his breath freeze in place and his fingers numb. He stopped going back. But the knocking didn't stop. 3 days into the voyage, a steward named Emily Carraway went missing. She was young, barely 18, with fiery red hair, and a voice that could calm screaming children in steerage. She was last seen near the lower levels, delivering towels. Her body was never found. Only her pendant, a silver cross, was discovered, shattered in half at the foot of the corridor near Compartment 13. The floor was slick with something that looked like melted ice, though no one could explain how it got there. From that night forward, more crew reported strange dreams. Dreams of drowning, not in water, but in blackness, thick and cold, alive, pressing in on all sides. They'd wake gasping for breath, unable to shake the sensation that someone, or something, was watching them even in daylight. The boilers burned bright. The engines thundered. But in their bones, the crew felt the cold creeping closer. Wallace Hartley, not the famed violinist, but the carpenter who shared his name, was a superstitious man. He kept iron nails tied around his wrist with a leather cord and crossed himself whenever he passed the corridor. He was the one called in when the humming started. A low, almost musical vibration, not unlike a bow being dragged across cello strings. It came through the metal like a whisper. He descended into the lowest corridor alone on April 13th. He never came back. They searched for hours. His lantern was found burning outside the rusted door. His boots placed neatly beside it. No blood, no signs of a struggle. Just a trail of water leading into the corridor. Then stopping. Not fading. Stopping. As though whatever made the prince simply cease to exist. That night, the lights flickered across the lower decks. Not a storm. Not a power failure. Just a moment of darkness. A flicker that seemed to suck all sound from the air. For 2 seconds, the Titanic groaned, like the hull itself exhaled, and the hum below turned into something else. A voice. Only a few could hear it. Barrett was one of them. He didn't understand the language, but he knew what it meant, a warning or a promise. The sea was still. The stars stretched overhead like a silent cathedral, and below, in the freezing dark of Compartment 13, the crate began to crack. April 14th began like the others. Cold wind brushing the decks, laughter echoing from first-class salons, and steam curling into the morning air from the massive stacks above. But below, in the depths where no sunlight reached, the mood was changing. The lower crew spoke less. Their faces became drawn and pale, as if the very ship were feeding on their fear. Some wouldn't even walk past the corridor anymore, choosing to take longer routes to their stations. The ones who did return weren't quite the same. Frederick Barrett had been a fireman for years, hardened by coal dust and the constant throb of steam engines. But even he began to question his senses. In the hours after Hartley's disappearance, Barrett reported hearing his voice, not calling for help, but humming. A low, off-key tune that echoed through the bulkheads. At first, he thought it was his mind playing tricks. Then others heard it too. Stokers. Engineers. All of them described the same thing, a slow, melodic hum, like a funeral dirge played underwater. At 3:27 p.m., an oil-streaked engineer stumbled into the upper engine room, white as a sheet, claiming he saw something move inside the corridor. Not someone. Something. He described a figure in the shape of a man, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, its arms too long. It didn't walk. It drifted, and when he made eye contact, he said its eyes were black, but not empty. They were full of something ancient. Something watching. He was relieved of duty and sent to his cabin. He was found hours later, wrists slit, a message scrawled in soot across the wall. It knows who I am. Back in Compartment 13, the steel door remained sealed, but the air around it continued to drop in temperature. Crew who passed too close reported nosebleeds, violent chills, or sudden, irrational anger. One man tried to throw a lantern at the door, screaming that it wanted him to. He was restrained, foaming at the mouth, and locked in storage. He died of a seizure before sunrise, every muscle in his body frozen stiff. The priest, no one ever learned his real name, was last seen praying silently in a lifeboat stationed on the port side. A steward approached him that evening, asking if he was feeling unwell. The old man looked up, eyes sunken and yellowed, and whispered, "The seal is breaking. It will feed tonight." He stood and walked straight to the railing, folded his hands over his chest, and fell backwards into the sea without a sound. No splash, no cry, just gone. Above, the music played on. The wealthy dined and danced, unaware that the heartbeat of the ship had changed. Passengers in second class began reporting strange dreams, shared dreams. One woman claimed she saw her dead husband standing at the edge of her bed, mouth full of seawater, whispering in a voice not his own. "There is something in the hull, something buried." Children cried in their sleep, clutching their chests, saying they felt the cold from the man in the floor. One boy stopped speaking entirely, drawing endless spirals in charcoal against the walls of the nursery. When asked what they meant, he only said, "That's where it lives. In the spiral. In the deep part." By the time evening fell, even officers began to notice the strange unease settling across the ship. First Officer Murdoch ordered a full inspection of the lower compartments. But when the team reached the hallway near the third, they refused to go further. One man, James Carlin, a seasoned officer, collapsed upon nearing the door, screaming that his lungs were filling with ice. He died hours later, despite showing no signs of drowning. His breath came out like smoke, even in the warmth of the infirmary. That night, the temperature dropped rapidly, not just outside, but inside the ship. Frost began forming on the brass railings of the lower stairwells. Water in buckets near the engine room froze solid. And through the hull, deep in the iron guts of the Titanic, the humming returned. This time, it came with voices. Not whispers, but chants. Dozens of them, layered over one another, in a language no one could identify. Some believed it was Russian. Others claimed it sounded older, pre-human. It echoed through the steel like breath through a hollow bone. Engineers began abandoning their posts. Some prayed, others wept. Then, just past 11:30 p.m., the ship jolted, not once, but twice. The first was the iceberg, shearing open the starboard side like tissue. The second came 6 seconds later, reverberating up from below like a heartbeat made of stone. At that exact moment, the lights flickered again, and the door to compartment 13 creaked open for the first time in 5 days. No one opened it. The latch was still intact. But those who saw it swore the metal had bent outward, as though something inside had pushed. Barrett was one of the few who remained on duty. He saw it with his own eyes. The crate was split down the middle, not broken, but peeled, like something had unwrapped itself. There was no sign of what had been inside. Only claw marks on the floor, 4 fingers, too long, dragging toward the forward bulkhead. A shape moved in the darkness then, not running but gliding, silent, fast. It passed by him with a stench of brine and old rotted paper. Barrett said it looked back just once, and smiled. Above, passengers felt only the shudder of impact, the pause in music, the silence before the panic. But below, the true catastrophe had already begun. The screams came slowly at first, muffled through layers of iron and steam. But by 11:45 p.m., panic had reached the decks. Officers scrambled, crew shouted conflicting orders, and lifeboats creaked as they were swung into place. To the eyes of the upper class, it was chaos. But below, something more methodical unfolded. Something that didn't belong to human confusion. It moved with intent. Barrett ran. His legs burned, lungs seared with cold. But he ran, his mind barely able to process what he'd seen. Behind him, the lights failed one by one, swallowed by advancing darkness. Not mere shadow, but something alive, rippling along the corridor walls like oil on water. As he turned a corner, he passed a mirror bolted near the engineering station. In its cracked surface, he glimpsed himself, and another face, layered just behind his, grinning. It vanished when he turned. Back near compartment 13, 2 firemen attempted to reseal the door. Neither returned. Their screams echoed up the maintenance shafts like distant seabird cries, brief, shrill, and abruptly silenced. Later, another crewman found one of their hats impaled on a valve wheel, frozen to the steel as though submerged in dry ice. Beneath it, a smear of handprints dragged toward a vent, each larger than the last. On the main deck, passengers were being roused from their cabins. Some resisted, others wept. But no one knew the truth. That the collision was only a symptom. That the ship itself had become a mouth, opening slowly to consume. In third class, a girl named Lydia Brennan began speaking in a voice not her own. She was 9 years old, Irish, soft-spoken. But now she recited verse in ancient Greek. Her eyes rolled back, arms twitching in time with the pulse of the ship. Her mother tried to calm her, but Lydia grabbed her wrist and hissed, "It's walking above the water. It's looking for the warmest soul." Then she collapsed, blood trickling from her nose, the scent of brine filling the hallway. Meanwhile, Barrett made it to Boiler Room 5, panting, clothes soaked with sweat and cold. He tried to speak, to warn the others, but his words came out as fog, literal fog, coiling from his mouth in tendrils that hung in the air far too long. One man, Thomas Blair, approached him with concern, but when their eyes met, he staggered back in horror. Barrett's pupils were gone. Not white, not rolled, just absent. 2 voids that drank light. And yet Barrett spoke clearly. "We need to get above. It's choosing now." Elsewhere, in the second-class writing room, passengers watched the chandeliers sway. A low hum permeated the space, not from the engines, which were now failing, but from the walls themselves. A vibration that seemed to crawl up the spine and settle behind the eyes. Mr. Gregory Farnsworth, a banker from New York, looked out the frosted window, and swore he saw footprints forming on the outside of the glass. Wet, heavy impressions, human-shaped, moving up the side of the ship, toward the bridge. By midnight, the waterline reached E-deck. Panic truly erupted. Yet in the middle of the chaos, some passengers stopped screaming. They stood still, transfixed by something unseen. A middle-aged woman in pearls dropped her handbag and calmly stepped off the edge of the promenade deck, her eyes locked on the black sea below. No hesitation, no sound. One man followed, then 3, then a dozen. They weren't jumping to escape. They were walking into the sea, as if answering a call. On the bridge, Captain Smith had sealed himself inside the wheelhouse, eyes locked to the compass that now spun uncontrollably. He muttered the Lord's Prayer through gritted teeth, but his hands trembled. Behind him, the glass of the helm fogged over slowly, not from breath, but from within. A shape began forming on the glass. A handprint, long, skeletal, with too many joints. The engines died at 12:04 a.m. In the silence that followed, the ship groaned. Not from pressure or damage, but something else. Something that sighed. Metal strained against itself. Walls cracked not outward but inward. And then came the sound again. Not the hum, not the voices, but something older. The laughter. It echoed through every pipe and panel, a sound like a child's giggle layered over bones breaking underwater. And at its center, something rising. Not water, not fire. Something else. Something from beneath. Back in the corridor near Compartment 13, the crate was gone. Only the twisted metal slats of the floor remained, scorched black and frozen stiff. The door stood wide open, and from the darkness beyond it, footprints led away. Not just one set, but many, as though something had brought friends. Barrett, now half-blind, climbed toward the upper decks. Along the way, he passed more signs of the thing's passage. Candles snuffed without wind, mirrors shattered from the inside, rats dead in piles, their fur frosted, mouths agape. He reached the grand staircase in time to see a woman scream and point upward. Suspended in the skylight above, framed by the icy moonlight, hung what appeared to be a man. Naked, gray-skinned, long limbs twisted at impossible angles. It clung to the glass like a spider, its eyes black and wet, its mouth a slit too wide. Then it vanished in a blink, dropping silently behind the stairwell. Passengers began to faint. Some convulsed. Others clutched their chests and whispered names not their own. It was choosing, moving among them, brushing minds, peeling back sanity like damp paper. And somewhere deep in the ship, below the screams and creaks and rushing water, a single voice whispered one final word, heard only by Barrett. "You brought me here." As water surged into the lower decks, the Titanic began to tilt ever so slightly. It was imperceptible at first, a subtle shift in balance, but enough to make chandeliers sway and footsteps stumble. Passengers clung to railings, while officers barked commands that fell flat beneath the rising chorus of fear. But something else was rising too, not just the water. A presence, a consciousness. Barrett stumbled into the upper gallery, his breath ragged, sweat freezing to his brow despite the heat pouring from the brass pipes overhead. Around him, time began to bend. A clock on the wall ticked backward. The smell of coal and metal was replaced by something dank, earthy, like the bottom of a grave recently disturbed. Voices echoed off the paneling, repeating his name in perfect unison. Barrett. 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 He reached the reading room and collapsed beside a velvet armchair, his vision flickering like a candle near death. A steward approached cautiously, asking if he needed help. But Barrett could only shake his head. "It's not done," he whispered. "It doesn't want the ship. It wants the story." In the first-class smoking lounge, the entity took a different approach. A group of men, dressed in tuxedos, began laughing uncontrollably, drinks in hand. But their laughter didn't stop. It sharpened, turned into screams masked by grins. One man smashed his glass into his own face, over and over, blood mixing with whiskey. Another clawed at his ears, sobbing, saying he could hear the ice speaking. Their madness was contained, locked inside with them, until the walls of the room cracked and the icy seawater flooded in without warning. The last thing heard was a chorus of voices chanting an unplaceable word. Phoros. 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 Up on deck the air felt wrong. Not just cold, but heavy, like the sky itself was pressing down. Survivors began to notice distortions in the stars, patterns rearranged, constellations unfamiliar. One passenger, an amateur astronomer, muttered in confusion that Orion had too many stars. "It's watching through them," he whispered, "like eyes, stitched into the night." Below deck, where compartment 13 had split open, the ship's metal groaned and flexed. Not because of water pressure, but as if something inside were breathing. The hallways twisted subtly, distances lengthened. Crew who tried to return to their posts found themselves walking in circles, rooms no longer where they should be. The geography of the Titanic was changing. Something was warping it. Meanwhile, in the nursery, the boy who had drawn spirals now sat perfectly still, eyes black with ink. He whispered to a lifeboat officer who passed him, "It remembers the flood, the first one, before men." The officer recoiled. That boy drowned 10 minutes later, though no water had yet reached the room. His lungs were full of seawater anyway. Back in the grand dining hall, Barrett caught a glimpse of something impossible. The silverware on a nearby table twisted slowly into shapes resembling letters. Latin. He recognized one word. Redemptio. Redemption. The metal snapped apart moments later, as though ashamed to be read. And then came the sounds, the knocks. Not just on walls, but on people. Soft thuds against the inside of skulls. Passengers screamed and clutched their heads as invisible fists pounded from within. One man collapsed, bleeding from the ears, babbling about a cathedral made of ribs beneath the ocean. Those who survived later would describe the moment as the ship weeping. Wood panels bled salt, pipes leaked tar, and every reflective surface, mirrors, glass, silver, no longer showed human faces. Only ocean. Dark, endless ocean. As the bow dipped further, the entity revealed its preference. It avoided the lifeboats. It bypassed the panicked. It sought the quiet, the grieving, the broken. Those already hollowed by loss. To them, it whispered. To them, it promised. Barrett saw one woman stand perfectly still on the freezing deck, her baby cradled in her arms. She wasn't crying. She was smiling. "He'll be warm now," she said to no one, and stepped into the sea without a sound. The water accepted her like a womb. Captain Smith was last seen standing at the helm, unmoving, his beard rimmed with frost, staring into nothing. But the last officer to see him swore that he wasn't alone. A figure stood behind him, tall, gray, faceless. Its hand rested gently on the captain's shoulder, as if comforting a pet. No one could reach the wireless room. The hallway outside it had collapsed, not from damage, but from age. Wood, rotten. Steel, brittle. As if it had been there for centuries, not days. And the stars began to move. At first, it seemed like panic. But as multiple passengers pointed skyward, a terrifying consensus emerged. The constellations were spinning, slowly, methodically, as though something behind them was watching through cracks in the sky. Barrett looked up. He saw not stars, but windows. Each twinkling light a portal, each shimmer an eye. Then he understood. It didn't come from the crate. The crate was a door. The true entity, the thing buried for centuries, guarded by monks, sealed with wax and prayer, had never been inside. It had been waiting just beyond, a place not of water or fire, but silence. Cold so deep it reversed time. It had waited patiently, listening, learning, and when the seal was broken, it stepped through. And now the Titanic wasn't just sinking, it was being pulled. Somewhere else. By 2 a.m. the Titanic had become a coffin half submerged in freezing water and dread. The bow pointed downward like the finger of God, accusing the sea, while the stern rose into the air, groaning with the weight of death. But above all that noise, a deeper sound echoed, like the tolling of a submerged bell made not of metal, but bone. Barrett clung to a railing on the upper deck, surrounded by screams and prayer, but none of it mattered. The water wasn't acting like water anymore. It didn't churn. It didn't splash. It crept. Cold tendrils licked the ship like curious tongues, as if tasting, and the icebergs nearby hadn't moved since the impact. They loomed silent, perfectly still, arranged like sentinels in a ritual circle. Behind him, shadows flickered with impossible speed, shapes that defied form. And from the mouth of a split smokestack, a column of smoke rose that wasn't smoke at all, but darkness made solid, rippling with faces that appeared and vanished like memories drowning. The lifeboats lowered into a sea that no longer reflected the sky. Survivors noticed first. The stars no longer shimmered in the black water. No moonlight, no reflection. The ocean had turned to obsidian, swallowing light. And in it, things moved. Slender, pale limbs brushing just beneath the surface, watching. A man in boat 6 leaned over the side and swore he saw a stairwell descending into the water, a staircase of coral and ivory leading into the deep. He was pulled back by others before he could step off the boat. He died minutes later, staring at the sky and repeating a phrase in an extinct dialect of Aramaic. On the ship, Father Boucher, one of the last clergymen still performing last rites, stood with a rosary made of coal beads, shouting Latin prayers as the deck tilted. But the words turned sour in his mouth. He screamed, coughing black brine, and collapsed, his skin cracking like porcelain. From the wound on his chest, frost poured out, coiling into the shape of a spiral before evaporating into steam. Barrett made his way toward the Marconi room, hoping against all logic that someone had stayed behind. He was right. Jack Phillips, one of the operators, was still at his post, tapping furiously. But he wasn't sending distress signals. Barrett looked at the paper beside him. It wasn't Morse. It was sigils, ancient symbols etched in blood. Jack turned to him with hollow eyes and said, "We have to give it a name. Once it has a name, it can anchor." "Anchor what?" Barrett tried to ask, but the words caught in his throat. Behind them, the floor buckled and split open, revealing not water, but sky. A sky made of moving stars and impossible geometry. The ocean didn't just rise into the ship. It bled through it, like a second dimension intruding upon ours. Barrett grabbed Jack and ran, but not before catching a glimpse of what lay below. It was not a creature. Not in the sense we know. It was a place. A realm. A city built in reverse, with spires of coral reaching downward into infinite cold, lit by bioluminescent horrors that whispered in perfect unison. He saw the Titanic's reflection in that place, not as it was, but as it had always been, wrecked, rusted, covered in growths. Time folded around it like a noose. The ship was sinking into its own future. Back on the upper deck, screams became fewer, replaced by sobbing, murmurs, or stunned silence. People stopped running. Many stood still, staring at the water, entranced. One man dropped to his knees and whispered, "It's beautiful. It forgives." Then he laughed until his ribs cracked. Barrett reached the edge of the ship just as it tilted violently. The stern lifted high. People slid like dolls down the decking. A woman clutched her child and looked up, directly into something that wasn't there seconds before. It hovered in the sky. Tall, angular, wings made of shadow and glass. Its body shifted with every blink. It had no face, no features, just rows of teeth circling a black void where its chest should be. It didn't roar. It exhaled, and with that breath, hundreds collapsed, dead before hitting the deck. Then, a voice. Not in the air, not in the ears, in the bones. "You made me myth. I made you memory." Barrett collapsed to his knees, blood leaking from his eyes, ears, and nose. His last clear thought was of his mother's voice singing to him in childhood. That, too, was overwritten, replaced by a lullaby in a tongue he had never heard, yet somehow knew was older than stars. And then came the final groan, the sound of the Titanic breaking. But it wasn't steel, it was flesh, a rib cracking, a spine snapping. The ship split not in half, but in thirds, each section folding like origami into the waiting arms of the sea. And where the Titanic once was, there now floated a silence so deep, no sound dared enter it. Only the lifeboats remained, bobbing. Empty. Barrett awoke, or dreamed he did. He was floating on debris in an ocean that stretched not into horizon, but into sky. There were no clouds, only walls. The sea lapped against something unseen, something solid. And in that moment, he knew. The Titanic had not sunk into the Atlantic. It had crossed over. Barrett floated in silence. No waves, no current. Just stillness, as if the sea had died too. Around him, the remains of the Titanic drifted slowly, suspended not on water, but on a surface like glass. The sky above no longer rotated. The stars were fixed, staring downward. He realized then, this wasn't the sea. This wasn't Earth. He drifted for what felt like hours, but time had no rhythm here. The light never changed. Hunger never came. Cold no longer hurt. He wasn't dead, but something in him was. And far below, in the impossible trench he'd glimpsed through the cracked floor, he saw it again. That city. No ships had ever mapped it. No sonar had ever found it. A metropolis made of angles too sharp for sanity, glowing from within, pulsing in rhythm with a heart too massive to fit in any body. It beat not with blood, but with memory. It fed on remembrance. And that's when Barrett understood. The Titanic had never been an accident. The route, the cargo, the priest, even the design flaw that allowed for Compartment 13, none of it was coincidence. It was a ritual, a sacrifice dressed as tragedy, a ship named for titans, carrying the pride of a modern age, doomed not by hubris, but by intent. 100 years earlier, something had been discovered in the Carpathian Mountains. Not a relic, not a creature, a signal, something that whispered through dreams and diagrams. It infected men of influence, engineers, architects, financiers. It gave them ideas they believed were their own, designs, materials, dimensions. It taught them how to build the door. Titanic wasn't a marvel. It was a key. A vessel designed not to reach New York, but to open a tear in reality. To carry hundreds of minds, warm, frightened, fragmented, into the cold, into its domain. Every passenger, every soul, each one a thread to be woven into the tapestry beneath the waves. Not to be consumed, but preserved, because that's what it did. It didn't eat, it remembered. It was an archivist of pain, of fear, of final moments. It kept the sound of their screams like lullabies. It played them back into the bones of those who got too close. And now, Barrett heard them all. The child, the priest, Hartley, the woman with the baby. Their voices echoed inside him, overlapping like a choir in endless descent. Suddenly, a jolt. Water splashed. He awoke in a hospital bed. New York City, April 20th, 1912. They said he'd been pulled from the sea by a rescue ship. Near delirium, frostbitten, but alive. He tried to speak, tried to explain what he'd seen, but no one listened. His name was listed among the miracle cases, a survivor who beat the odds. But Barrett knew better. This wasn't his world anymore. Something was off. Too warm, too loud. The stars wrong again, and the dreams came. Every night. The city below. The spirals. The hum. He began sketching. Symbols. Spirals. Eyes. People said he was gifted. He said he was haunted. Then, on the 10th anniversary of the sinking, he disappeared. Vanished from his apartment. Door locked from the inside. Windows unbroken. The only clue, a small puddle of salt water on the floor, and his final drawing pinned to the wall. The Titanic, intact, sailing upward through a tunnel of teeth. And in the lower corner, scrawled in coal-black ink, she didn't sink. She was taken. The world moved on. Memorials were built. Movies were made. And still, Compartment 13 is never spoken of. But deep-sea scans in the late 1990s revealed a chilling detail. Near the stern of the real wreck, obscured by silt and barnacle, a steel door remains intact. No rust, no pressure damage, etched with a number, 13. And if you listen carefully, you'll still hear it, knocking.